You are listening to E-Radio Show
by Missed Apex. We are electric.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the E-Radio Show. I'm Matt Trumpets, and today's episode is called Seventh Heaven. Joining us today is our very own man-on-the-spot, intrepid journo no more _ Chris Stevens. How are you doing today, Chris?
Doing great, Matt. Fresh off the plane back from Roma, where it has been molto bene indeed, and molto wet as well. A lot of rain showers out there.
And that's the Italian for wet, right? Wet. Molto wet. I'm impressed by your...
Molto acqua.
I'm impressed by your command of the language after such a short time in country. So before we go on and talk about the actual race, which actually happened, I need to let everybody know we are an independent podcast produced in the podcasting shed with the kind permission of our better halves, bringing you race reviews, news from the paddock, and tech analysis. We live stream our race reviews, so be sure to subscribe to E-Radio Show on YouTube so you get a notification when we go live, so you can join our live chat room as well. So tell me about it. I saw the race. I did not, in fact, see qualifying. How did everybody wind up there on the grid? I'm dying to know.
It was bonkers, wasn't it? I mean, aside from a few cars, it almost looked as if the grid had been turned upside down. It was really, really bizarre. And I think what a lot of drivers have been talking about this season, you know, the curse of Q1 getting the worst track conditions, was actually, it did ring true this weekend. I think the fact that the weather was very inconsistent in Rome at the weekend, it was flittering between cold, showery, boiling sunny, nice weather, but you know, every hour or so. So I think, you know, when the guys who went out in Q1 did in fact get the worst track conditions, apart from the guys who went to Super Bowl, because that's when it started raining, obviously. So that explains why they all ended up so much further down the grid. So we ended up with the title contenders way down the order, outside the top 15. I mean, D'Ambrosio was down in 20th place again, you know, and it doesn't help that the Mahindra doesn't have exceptional qualifying pace anyway. It's much more set up for the race. But even cars you'd expect to be quick in qualifying, you know, the BMWs and the teacher of John-Eric Verne, well, he actually had an issue on his front suspension, so that explains why he was so much lower down. But Audi, nowhere. What we ended up with was, you know, the guys. So Lotterer, Evans, Buemi in Super Pole, kind of people you'd expect. But both Dragons in Super Pole, which really did come as quite a shock, because they have been consistently down the back of the grid with Neo. And you'd even argue that HWA are ahead of them at times. And again, Van Dorn showing he's really, really strong in those tricky conditions and getting the most out of it. I do think that lot being in Q4 did help a little bit. But of course, that's when the rain came and kind of disrupted qualifying, because it rained, you know, in between group qualifying and Super Poles and then stopped. So basically, they just stayed in that same order that they qualified in group qualifying, because, you know, because it goes in reverse order. So whoever was sixth goes out first, got the worst track conditions, and then just as the track dried up, whoever was, you know, so it was then Gunther on pole, and then Van Dorn on pole, and then Lopez and Evans. And it looked like Lotterer threw it away for a little bit at one corner, but even then the track was changing and getting speed so quickly, he still managed to get pole.
All right, well, I was going to actually bring this up a bit later, but I noticed in the post-show that D'Ambrosio was, for someone who's now leading the championship, remarkably critical of the qualifying procedure in terms of it being unfair to the drivers. But if you were going to have weather that is changeable, I mean, what's to say it wasn't Q4 that could have gotten hit, but with the worst of the rain and the cold, and those people in the, I said Q, Group 4 versus Group 1. Group 4 might have lost out if the weather had just happened slightly later or slightly sooner. So is this a thing that we're always just going to hear from the drivers because they feel like it's unfair? But it's also part of what makes this series more equal. So what do you think of that? What do you make of that complaint? Is this going to be a problem going forward for Formula E.
The driver's always going to complain about it, especially the guys at the front of the field, because it disadvantages them. But that's the whole point of it. It's worth saying as well, yes, it is changeable. If we hadn't had a red flag in qualifying, for example, the rain would have arrived in the middle of Super Bowl, and Buemi probably would have started at the head of the field rather than sixth. So it's always going to play a different role race by race. And it's not supposed to be the purity of Formula One, for example. Their qualifying system works, and even they're talking about trying to find ways to bring the quicker cars further down the orders to make the racing better. Formula E does that. You're never going to be able to satisfy everyone in the championship and the fans at the same time, because if we just had, Audi and Techeetah and BMW starting from the front every single race, the races wouldn't be as good.
Yeah, and Rally, for example, is another series that builds that kind of disadvantage into people who are leading. And you could make the opposite argument that Formula One qualifying actually reinforces an existing advantage and makes it worse when it comes to the actual racing. Makes it harder to say, harder for the teams to say equal to have a better chance at a podium or a good result. Eric in the chat room would very much like to know where on earth the pace from Dragon and Jaguar came from. Now, I'm not as convinced by the Dragon pace because, well, we didn't really get to see it because of lap one, which we'll get into later. But the Jaguar pace was very real. He seemed to be the fastest. Was this just a byproduct of the particular weather, the particular surface? Or have they finally given us the car they've been promising all along?
I'll start off with Dragon, actually, because if you remember last year, how about halfway through the season, they suddenly had loads of qualifying form. And I think it was a combination of them, going out at the end of qualifying every single time and supposedly getting the best track conditions, but also they found something in the setup that just made the car work over a single lap really, really well. Now, obviously, we can't make the same claim based on just this one race, especially because we didn't get to see how it unfolded in the race as well. But I'd be fascinated to know if this is, a trend we're going to see across the rest of the season now, and whether Dragon have now found something again. And in a way, this is related to Jaguar because they started off the season not bad. There was Mitch Evans in Super Pole in Marrakesh at P4, I think, or he was in the top 5 in Adiria, was quite competitive in Marrakesh in the race as well, and then it suddenly just plummeted. The thing is, these guys are all learning this new car, and so sometimes when you make an adjustment in the setup that you think is going to be an improvement, you actually make it worse. And that's just something you have to learn. You have to make these mistakes to know what the effect of it is. This season was always going to be about who gets a handle on the Gen 2 car quicker in terms of setup. Now, a lot of teams are still getting it wrong. And we're seeing that based on the fact that, it's just up and down every single race between all the guys. We've got 8 teams capable of winning races because we've already had 7 of them doing so. And there's still more. There's still more to come from this lot. So there is there's going to be a lot more inconsistency, I feel. And Jaguar are one of those ones who've just spent a little bit more time. The quote from Mitch was that they've been going round and round in circles with the setup before they eventually came down to what ended up being their race-winning performance.
Well, that's good for them. And the thing that's amazing is just because they have it this time doesn't guarantee they'll have it next time. It just really seems to change on a circuit-by-circuit basis.
Exactly. 3 races ago, Mitch Evans was saying, yep, we're a second slower than everyone else because they couldn't just get the car to work. And we've seen Mahindra. That was another comment from Eric, actually, about how Mahindra having a very similar season to last season, where they started off great and then really tapered off. And I was asking the guys in the team, and they obviously kind of shrug it off and say like, well, I wasn't here last year, so it doesn't matter. And they're like, well, it does matter because it's eerily similar for Mahindra. They started off so well. Maybe they just hooked up the car better for those first few races than everyone else, but now everyone else is slowly creeping up, or maybe they made something worse. Pascal mentioned that they've also been using private testing for the new car and this is something a lot of teams are probably doing, that they're using those tests to learn more about the Gen 2 car itself, not just to test the powertrain, but to test some setup things that they then try on the current car. And Jerome did that test, and you will have noticed, Pascal was way clear of Jerome for a couple of races, and then suddenly Jerome sort of came back on him. Jerome took part in that test, and Pascal hasn't. And so maybe Jerome perhaps found something that he likes, and then they've got that to work, and Pascal's still not quite there with it yet. Ultimately, I still will say that car's pace in qualifying, it's not his strongest point. It's really, really good in race trim, but they've got to be able to start high enough on the grid to take advantage of that. Otherwise, they're just going to spend all their time rising from 20th to 8th like they did in Rome, like they did or they would have done in Mexico if it wasn't for all the last lap craziness that gifted D'Ambrosio effectively a top 5 finish.
Yeah, well, how much do you think that might be down just to something like, say, simulator work, or because it seems like you say, it's interesting they would show up so strong and then just completely tail off throughout the season. So it seems like it's not just that they're losing something, but that they're falling behind the other team's pace of development or the other team's ability to understand the car better as time goes on.
I think, in all honesty, a lot of this season is coming down to the luck of the draw as well. You remember the first season of Formula E where there was just zero consistency. We had, I think, 6 different winners in the first 6 races that year. And it was really only towards the end of the season that we started to see, the same guys up the front. And I don't want to, say anything against Nelson, but for somebody who won a championship, he's not shown any kind of pace since then. We could end up with a similar scenario this season going into the future. We're going to be seeing a whole bunch of guys who are really, really competitive this season really taper off in the future, I think, just because they hit a glass ceiling or whatever, and the madness of this season, the inconsistency between races because of varying track conditions, setup, people learning the new car, etc., is going to unbalance them. So we're still learning the grid order. There isn't really a grid order. You've got maybe 8 or 9 teams that are the sort of top, and then a couple of teams that are struggling a little bit. But it's just going to keep coming down to the luck of the draw. Whether you hit it right, you got to hit all the spots right. Pre-race, practice, nail the qualifying, which is easier said than done, especially with this qualifying format. That's why we end up with this mad championship. That's why we've currently got 13 points separating the top 9 in the championship. And if people want to complain about that format, I will never understand it.
Unless they were a driver, of course.
Well, I still won't understand it. It's just, it sucks for you. Your life is so difficult.
But it's the kind of thing where when they're on top, they will absolutely positively complain about it. And then when it advantages them, they'll be super happy and think it's awesome, because that's the way drivers think. Let's be honest.
Don't hear Stoffel complaining about it, do you?
No, not at all. Speaking of Nelson, how painful must it be for him to watch Jaguar turn up the race after he leaves or, was kicked out, depending upon who you want to believe, and watch them win? Ouch. Am I right about that?
I don't think Nelson is the kind of person who would care, to be honest. He probably shrugged his shoulders and didn't think all that much of it, to be honest, because in reality, he wouldn't have been the one scoring that win, probably, would he? It's not like if he was there, Jaguar would have been 1-2 in that race.
Yeah, you kind of have a good point. What else happened in qualifying that helped set the stage for the race that we saw then? Anything else we need to mention before we move on?
It's worth mentioning Alex Sims, because he had a drive shaft failure because of the jump. We've all seen a lot of super cool slow-mo shots of the jump between turns 8 and 9. Man, it's awesome, the fact that they go all 4 wheels over the up in the air. But it's very, very tough on drive shafts, and unfortunately Sims gave way. And so he ended up at the back of the grid, like, and taking, had to change the gearbox, the motor, inverter, everything. That's all 20 place grid penalties that you can't take because he's starting at the back of the grid. So he has a 10-second stop go penalty that I disagree with that format, starting at the back of the grid. So convert their penalty into a time penalty in Formula One in the race, because we saw that in Formula One very briefly, and it was not popular. And I think Formula E needs to kind of follow suit on that, because I really hate it, because you're just taking cars out. There's no point in Sims, taking part in that race at that point, is there?
Well, unless there's a red flag or a safety car, of course.
Yeah, but normally, that doesn't happen. Yeah, safety car maybe, but we shouldn't be getting red flag. I'm gonna go off on one about red flags.
All right.
When we go up to it, but it shouldn't be happening.
No, I agree. I don't like the time penalty being put to the back of the grid, or make them start from the pit lane like Formula One. That's fine with me. But the idea that you need to actually calculate and serve all these penalties because the teams will just use it as an excuse to run more powertrains than they're allowed per season seems it seems ridiculous. I don't know. Call me crazy. Seems ridiculous. The car was damaged. They replaced it. So let's give them a time penalty in addition to, I don't know. I don't know. But I have some questions about that too that we can get to later on. What else? Any other penalties? Any other people get in serious trouble? Get sent to the naughty step or whatever it is?
Pascal Wehrlein was speeding under red flag conditions in FP2, and he got a 5-place grid penalty, which dropped him down to 14th, which is rather unfortunate.
All right, then. What say we go talk about where the race was won and lost? So, talk about an action-packed lap number 1. And that's the only lap I know, because they still won't put a lap counter up along with the times, which I don't know who I have to write a letter to, but I would just be so delighted to be able to say, oh, on lap 17 this happened, instead of, well, at minute 32 this happened. It just, that's just me being old and grumpy. I'm yelling at clouds about this a little bit. I get it. However, what on earth happened with Jose Maria Lopez in that first lap? Because, that could have been me driving that nuttily.
Yeah, pretty wild first lap for Pachito. Wide at turn 1, takes Sambird out of the race, and he would have been out of the race if it wasn't for the red flag, and then bins the car in the stadium section in 2 laps. And the mad thing is that no one said there was an issue with his car. So the assumption then is that that's all Lopez, which is just really, really odd. I know he can be a bit erratic at times, but this was something else. This really was. And Esteban in the chat asked about, the Lopez Bird lap 1 collision. From what I've seen of it, because we haven't yet had the proper onboard footage of it. If it was Lopez up the inside of Bird, as we believe it was, and I think the steward saw it that way as well, because Lopez was the one who ended up with the penalty for it, 100% Lopez's fault. If it was Bird trying to go around the outside, my argument would be complete opposite. But from what we understand, it was Lopez putting a move on Bird. So, quite justified penalty there, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting one, because the last thing they showed us in the race was Lopez ahead of Bird. And then they cut away. And then the only footage we ever saw was of the actual incident. So we don't know the order they were running in approaching that turn. So it makes it hard to really say, whose fault it was, because, and this, I guess maybe we can be a little tiny bit like, oh, come on, Formula E. I know it was a busy race, but surely at some point you could have gone back and found that footage and tied that in a neat little bow for us.
Yeah, maybe. I'm sure we'll get it when the footage compilation comes out at some point this week. So we're just gonna have to wait a couple of days for answers, unfortunately.
No, I want it, and I want it now. Sorry, that's the I Want a Pony award, my
Don't
version of
care
it.
how. I want it now.
There you go. Okay. So the first lap, obviously Lopez is just completely, he's a loose cannon, completely out of control. But at the front, we already had some really, really good action, particularly because half the grid was on a very slippery surface. So it resulted in some changes and a really robust defense from Lauderer to hang on to his pole position.
Yeah, he really did have to get in, get in there and cut Evans off of the head. And there was, just the tiniest little nudge in there as well for good measure. We didn't really get to see it properly pan out at that stage because we had the red flag almost immediately. And so I am going to talk about the red flag for a little bit now. And, we would have seen in 50 races, or just prior to Mexico, so 48 races, we had one red flagged Formula E race. Suddenly, the last 4 or 5 have all been red flagged. And it is all down to this timed qualifying race format that they now run for this season. Now, I see the appeal in it because we're all talking about how great Mexico City was because of the timed format, right? This race as well could have had 2 finishers if Evans had crossed the line like 8 seconds faster and added another lap to that race. There would have been no finishers because no one had enough energy for that, right? So, we're sitting there, we will praise it, but at the same time, there is this issue where because they go to the time format, and we've been talking about this a lot on e-radio, anytime you have a safety car or a full course yellow, that is it. There is no strategy left in the race. It is flat out to the end. And that makes overtaking just so difficult. And because the drivers have been complaining about it so much, they're now much more inclined to just throw a red flag out so that we still have an element of strategy in the race and energy saving. Races have to be energy dependent to create that and to allow for overtaking opportunities. You'll see because they struggle so much to get by. They've had to resort to really using quite heavy contact to make an overtake happen, which the stewards are just turning a blind eye to because they know if they penalize it all the time, no one's going to try anything. So we were really in this catch-22 moment with Formula E at the moment, and it's coming to a head, and that's why we're seeing so many red flags at the moment. Now, the thing they really, really ought to do, the simplest solution, right, is to just throw a safety car out, stop the clock. If the safety car is out, you do not keep continuing the clock. They do this in BTCC, right, where if they have a safety car, they'll throw on an extra 2 or 3 laps, right? Do the same. You have to. You can't be looking. Sebastian Buemi was really, really not happy about this. I mean, he said that it's making us look like amateurs. It's really unprofessional to keep having these red flags because at the rate they're going, they're going to have a red flag every single race. Now, in fairness, right, in this one, a red flag was the right choice because the track was blocked, right? So in this scenario, fair's game. But the fact that we've had 5 or however many consecutively red flagged races, that is an issue. And they need to change something.
Yeah, it was very much shades of Macau when Lopez put it into the wall and then Verne rear-ended Paffett. Was it Paffett? Yeah.
So unfortunate for both of them, right? Because Paffett was just totally the innocent victim in that, and went home early after that. So he can pay the fine for missing all the media stuff. I think they get, but so that ended his race, and luckily Jev got away with just a bit of a broken nose, so they could fix that under the red flag. Big winner for that though was Sam Bird because he would have been out of the race. And amazing job by the Envision Virgin Racing crew to get that car fixed, the rear suspension changed and fixed, ready to go. For the restart. It was quite a lengthy stop, about 45, 50 minutes. And actually, I think made it the longest Formula E race in history in terms of time. But nonetheless, great job because even though Sam didn't score points in that race, the opportunity was 100% there.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of intrigued by the suggestion that it's problematic that the energy savings needs to be there at some level, or the regeneration needs to be there at some level in order for the race to have strategy. But I'm going to differ with you, or I'm going to ask you a question. This is a little bit further down my list. First of all, I found that as the race went on, the use of the attack mode, because we finally didn't have somebody who just driven off into the distance, I found that to be an element of strategy, especially at the front end of the field. But more to the point, is this really an issue of energy in terms of the difficulty of overtaking, or is this an issue where the size of the cars have outgrown the circuit characteristics that are being designed for? Because it seems like most of the better overtaking opportunities had like 1 3/4 lines through them.
No, no. You will see it. The proper tracks they've gone to, like Adirio is a decent sized track. Marrakesh, obviously, semi permanent facility. Mexico's permanent facility. Rome is probably the best street course that they go to all season. But I mean, even so, the car is the same size that it was last season. Obviously, a bit quicker. There's in Rome actually they were 6 seconds quicker than they were last year on a proper full grown circuit. So there's that to consider. But the cars are just, they're too similar, right? So there's no advantage in one particular area of the track where you can try and pull an overtake. Attack mode's only going to be able to do so much, especially because you're also having to regain that distance. It's you're having to make up and then go for the overtake, but also save a bit of energy at the same time. So yeah, there needs to be an element of energy saving. Look at the last 4 seasons of Formula E where it's always been energy dependent. And the racing was much cleaner, much better, and this year is just all over the place. And Rome is a great circuit, right? And properly, wide works wonders for the Gen 2 car. I think really, really good for the car, right? So it's not so much an issue with the cars. Yes, some of the tracks for sure are an issue, right? But the format is really, really compounding the issue, and they need to make races more energy dependent.
Well, wouldn't it also just be simpler to make them longer?
Right. So
50 minutes instead of 45? I don't know.
Yeah, right. So having it at a 55-minute race would also be good, but then you still have the issue of the safety car. So they being able to save energy under the safety car. So they need to do one of two things. There's a few simple avenues they can explore here where they extend the race distance, stop the clock if there's a safety car, or they just go back to a lap distance, right? Either way, the result needs to end up with more energy saving, better racing, and consistent stewardship.
All right, so let's talk about it. Obviously, not everybody was happy with the decisions that were made on track. But what is the solution here, given the current constraints of the series, where pretty much to get by, it's going to be some horizontal contact between the cars? What is the answer? How do you solve this problem?
Well, I mean, there's the number one thing I heard was lack of consistent stewardship, because the example I'll bring up was Sims just snagging the back of Mortara in Santiago, being demoted from a podium to like 8th, whereas other drivers would do way worse things and get nothing. Lotterer made up places by making contact with 2 cars in Sanya and got nothing, right? That's not consistency, right? And it goes back to that thing: if the stewards just keep throwing out the penalties for it, then no racing will ever happen. So once you solve this issue of the races not being energy dependent, once you make them that way, you'll find that the other issue goes away, right? Because Seb was saying to me, like, oh yeah, did you notice today's race was actually way cleaner because we had to save energy? And they're like, yeah, it was an awful lot better. There was, apart from Lopez on the first lap, there was no silly driving, no hideous amounts of contact to make overtakes, happen. Um, and the other thing as well, I was astounded by was when Lucas told me there is no feedback from the stewards to the drivers. Right, you get the penalty. That's it. There's no communication between them, and it seems like none of this got brought up in the drivers' briefing, and it seems like the drivers are even reluctant to kind of bring it up. Really, I mean, I asked Seb about it. Like, so what do you do? You have to start championing for your rights to to be able to race each other? And he goes, well, I'm just a driver at the end of the day. And well, yeah, but you guys are complaining about it, so try and do something about it. But definitely, there seems to be a block going on between the drivers and some people in Formula E. So work through that. Energy efficient races, you'll find the racing gets a heck of a lot better.
All right, well, that makes a very large amount of sense. It's interesting to me that they wouldn't. Oftentimes, you hear in Formula One, oh, you have to go see the steward about this, have to go see him about that. But you're saying that never happens. The team principal never talks to the race director when they're deciding on these things. They just like zap. That's it, and you're done. Because I could understand the frustration if you can't get a verbal explanation of why they chose to do what they did, because you might agree or disagree, but at least you would understand the thinking behind it, and that would help you as a driver understand where they're trying to draw their limits.
There is that there, so you will still get like a representative from the team to go and see the stewards, especially if the race is still going on, right? Or if there's an appeal or whatever. So we saw this in Hong Kong as well when we had the bird lottery issue. But the drivers themselves are not getting anything, from the stewards. They have the penalty explained to them, and then that's it.
Right. Well, I don't want to steal your thunder too much, but I will say that I feel like this is the first race where I saw attack mode work the way they had possibly envisioned it. And that was right at the front of the field.
I wouldn't say the first. It worked really well in Marrakesh and in Santiago. It did work out well. It wasn't a case of like we saw in Sanya where Verne was pulling the gap to take attack mode, and then because at that point it seems like a disadvantage. So people are really pulling away so that when they do have to take attack mode, they don't lose a place.
Yeah, but it was integral to the race at the front, the order they went in when they chose to do it, and whether or not they pulled it off the first time. I mean, you couldn't have asked for a better demonstration of, oh, this is how it is supposed to work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're 100% right. So Evans pulled the trigger on it, right? And used it to close up. And I got to say, move of the season on Andre Lotterer as well. Yes, there was a bit of contact between them, but Andre was squeezing him, and that is a tight chicane. And I think Evans knew he had one opportunity to take the lead of the race from that. That was it. So he had to make it stick. And it was a great move. I don't think you can argue otherwise. Cracking stuff between them. So the second time round, Lotterer tries to pull the trigger on attack mode 2, right? And as much as they said they were going to fiddle around with attack mode so that teams couldn't simulate races, has been the same in every race, and I think we're starting to see a little bit of an effect of that. But I digress. And it really kind of came to a head when Evans missed the second attack mode, right? Because that loses you 1, 2, 3 seconds maybe. So he has to work up that gap again, and it's a good job he was energy saving in the first half of that race, because that's what gave him a little bit of an advantage when it came down to it, and he's got to rebuild up that gap. And I think also Jaguar did just have the pace over Lotterer. Lotterer was saying after the race, I think I was in the wrong setting because I was really under consuming at the beginning of the race. And then I think the tire pressures were a bit too high because suddenly in the second half of the race, they really didn't really drop away, but the pace wasn't where it should have been. And so, yeah, I do think Jaguar were just playing quicker than Cheetah this weekend. And that Evans, despite his guff, pulled a really good strategy with attack mode.
Yeah, well, I think the explanation of the tire pressures makes sense, especially if you account for the fact that it was wet. So they were likely to be running a setup, and as the track dried, that would then bring the people who were running more towards a quote unquote wet setup would then be putting more and more energy into their tires, which would cause the pressures to rise more than they would have expected based on the dry running, if that makes any sense at all. And then if the tires are getting over temperature a little bit, they won't bite, they won't grip quite as well as if you got them correctly in the window. But I love that, you're talking about this all casually, but when they went for those second set of attack modes, it was the last 7 minutes of the race. I mean, it was down to it, and he had to defend with no way to equal out the power advantage until Lauderer had used up all of his advantage, and then he had to nail it the second time round. And it was just it was a spectacular duel from start to finish at the front. I mean, just frankly, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Sign me up because I really, really, really enjoyed it, and I didn't for once mind them just forgetting about almost entirely the rest of the race.
I was just going to say, it's been a good race at the front when you have no idea what happened to anyone, fourth or lower, right? We didn't even see them at any point. It was such a good race up front. And yeah, as attack mode working the way it was designed to. I was a little bit worried about the placement of it, in all honesty, because they did it on the inside of a corner again. And I think if they'd have put it, say, around like at the hairpin, for example, they would have lost a lot more time and it would have acted out very, very differently. But actually putting it there, because it wasn't even like it was directly on the exit of a corner either. It was a good 30 meters away from the exit of the corner. So they didn't cost them anywhere near as much speed as it would have done in, say, Adiria or in Sanya as well, right? Not Sanya, Hong Kong, where they went on the inside of the hairpin. So I think that helped a little bit because, like we saw with Lucas in Sanya, right? So he missed the attack mode 3 times or twice and just lost so much time because of it. Because Evans didn't lose all that much time, missing attack mode in this race, he didn't have as much of a gap to rebuild to take attack mode for. And the chat rooms even saying, yeah, who even finished fourth? They did, because no one showed it. It was France, by the way.
Yeah, it was. But that does bring up the other thing. I mean, you mentioned the pass that Evans put on Lauderer, and both Lauderer and Evans was on the radio immediately. I didn't hit him, which of course wasn't true. He absolutely hit him. You could see bits of car coming off when they smashed through the chicane together. He hit Lauderer. Lauderer hit him to make his exit. But rubbing is racing at this point in Formula E. What really blew my mind was the race director's warning. I've never seen that before. I've never heard of that before. I mean, am I wrong in thinking either that was a penalty or it wasn't a penalty? Because you could clearly see by the way they drove, no one was trying to put anyone into a wall. It was just the fact the track wasn't wide enough for 2 people to fit through there.
And it's just the fact that you've got the tight left-hander after that as well. Andre was squeezing him a little bit. Yeah, do I feel like anyone needed to step in at any point? No, because that level of contact, that was just kind of rubbing in on each other, where Andre's trying to squeeze him, Evans up on the curb, understeers into him a little bit. Evans didn't use contact to get ahead of Andre, right? Here's the crucial thing, right? So if I were to compare that to, say, Andre's pass on, was it Lucas at the hairpin in Sanya, where he did just take a tighter line, made sure he got to the apex first with way too much speed and just use the guy in front as a brake and just, boop, you're out the way, I'm going through on the inside, right? That you step in for. What we saw between those guys in Rome, I would not step in for.
Yeah, I wouldn't have either. It seemed fair. And like you say, really, if Formula E is going to have a principle about how do we deal with this until we deal with it, the larger issue of the energy savings, then I think the answer is literally in your words. If the contact is used to make a pass, then you've violated a rule. If the contact happens as a consequence of passing, i.e., I've got enough speed and I'm in a position to make the overtake, well then that's just going to be the way it is right now.
And he was in a position to
Absolutely.
overtake. He had the extra boost. He had the better run out the corner, because that was a proper classic racing maneuver where you undercut the guy at the apex of the corner and get the better run out. Classic stuff. I mean, yeah, it wasn't the most. Evan said, if you'd have told me where I was going to pass him, that isn't the corner I'd have picked, because there are better overtaking opportunities there. But he had that one shot and he had to take it. And he is exactly what he did. Now, and remember what I said about, how the championship is going to come down to a little bit of luck. There's stuff like that. And John-Eric Vergne was furious after the race, right? I'm going to talk about him for a little bit, because he would be leading the championship had he finished where he crossed the line. He crossed the line in 7th, right? From, I think, 16th on the grid, maybe 17th on the grid. Great stuff, right? Awesome recovery. And got a drive-through penalty for passing Antonio Felix da Costa under the full course yellow. Now, this was a really odd one, right? We got to see a replay of it, right? Maxi Gunter, he slows up really quickly. Antonio slows up so he doesn't just run into the back of him, and Vergne has to take avoiding action. So it was either hit Antonio or overtake him. At no point was he told, let Antonio back through. And now it's not like he was pulling a dangerous maneuver, because the full course yellow thing is really, really confusing, I think, to some. If you're not in that scenario, it's really hard to know what's going on, because there are two. You have a countdown 1. We're going to go to full course yellow, and then full course yellow in 3, 2, 1. And even then, you don't have to slow down on that 1 second. You have 5 seconds to reach the required 50 kilometers an hour speed limit. So you're going to have all these guys slowing down at quite different rates. So it's not like Jev was doing anything stupid or dangerous that warranted a penalty. They could have just said, let Antonio back through.
Yeah, and to me that's where it goes very wrong, because there's not, I don't know, maybe there's a countdown clock on the dashboard, but if that clock hasn't gone off, then he was well within his rights to take that position. And in fact, Franchitti on the world feed commented on it. He's like, get it where you can. And I noticed Lauderer did the same thing. He created a nice big gap to Evans just by running out the clock on the amount of time they give you to slow down to 50, which, if you talk to any driver who races professionally, especially in mixed classes, one of the biggest issues is when the amateurs break versus when the professionals break, for things like, the 60-kilometer-hour zone at Nürburgring, or it is a thing. And for whatever reason, if you're there, you're going to take advantage of it. And they should have simply said, you should yield a position or we penalize you because you took it after the full course yellow is. But I don't know, maybe if you read the rules carefully, that situation's already accounted for. I've not done that.
It doesn't surprise me one bit that it was Maxi Gunter slowing up quicker. He's a young guy, right? He was in F2 last year. Da Costa and Vergne, much, much older, more experienced guys, they've been around. They know how to eke out an advantage from a full course yellow. Leave it to the absolute last second to get it down to that limit. You can gain time, right? Maxi doesn't have the kind of confidence to do that, especially given that this is only his 4th race, because he was standing in for Felipe Nasr. He was racing at Long Beach in the IndyCar at the weekend, right? So it doesn't surprise me one bit that scenario presented itself, which makes it all the more staggering that it was just like, at some point, common sense has got to prevail here. So going back to my previous point, how it's going to determine the championship, because things like that is going to say, because, and I'll tell you why as well. Jev was really, really angry about Mexico when he got passed by a couple of guys under the full course yellow. And he went to go and see the stewards. He went to go and speak to the race director about it after that race. And they were just like, no, well, it's fine. Whatever. We didn't have anything to say about it. So that at that moment, they set a precedent. They set a precedent for it. And now they're going against it.
You have got to be kidding me. Yeah, now, I mean, I know people like to say, oh, Vern is always furious about everything, always. But yeah, I would have been pretty furious about that too. If I was told I could pass until full course yellow until the 5 seconds were up, and I did that, and then I got penalized for it, and nobody bothered to, no. No, 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 no. That is wrong. The rules should be simple. Once I declare full course yellow, no more overtaking. You have 5 seconds to slow down. Boom, end off.
I need to correct what I just said. Of course, it's IMSA for NASA, not IndyCar. That was there.
Yeah, that was in Long Beach. Yes.
Where did I say it was? He was at IMSA. That's all that matters. I forget where it was at Long Beach.
The IndyCar was at Long Beach.
So it was IMSA, right?
They do one together. They might have both been there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was.
Doesn't matter. This is Formula E we're talking about.
NASA matters, all right?
Yeah, no, he does matter. Okay, so I'm glad you got to that because that was on my list of things I wanted to ask about. I'll tell you something else I want to ask about. Lauderer ahead of Vern. Is this the convergence? Have we reached singularity?
No. This was a really bizarre race, right? Jev, the front suspension issue in qualifying obviously didn't help him, really hindered him. They're qualifying in different groups. Not saying anything away from Andre. He had a spectacular weekend, but Jev should have been further up the grid, and we would have seen quite a different race. And Andre hasn't, been a Jev beater at this point this season, I think. So, we'll see how that pans out. But no, we haven't seen like a transition, Andre's now the number one to Cheetah, because they don't do that.
No, I know they don't do that, but I mean, it's looking pretty close for him to take his first win sooner or later. And the gap between them has narrowed. And, I've asked you this before because let's admit it, some of that is about the drama, about the competition between the teammates. So,
well, I thought after Andre got pole that this was going to be, redemption for Hong Kong. What it ended up being was, a retribution for Mitch Evans after he was denied that shot of victory at this race last year.
Yeah, and couldn't have happened at a better time for Jaguar, who have been chasing this for quite some time, haven't they?
Really, yeah. I can't say the missed opportunities, Rome and Zurich from last season. Jaguar is a very popular team. Mitch Evans, very popular boy in the paddock. This is a very good news story for Formula E. I think there'll be a lot of people very happy for the team and for Mitch as well, because it has been a long time coming for the pair of them.
All right, so I do want to bring up something else, which is that that jump, because oh my goodness, did we got to see lots of here at home. Lots of slow motion footage of the cars 4 wheels off the ground, which was awesome. But I also couldn't help but notice the amount of Venturi powertrains that then broke. So what is going on with the Venturi powertrain? Because every time as someone says Venturi, I always hear the word drive shaft mentioned in conjunction with it. Is this just an inherent weakness of their design? And are they going to be able to fix it?
This actually brings us nicely onto the sort of F1 alumni, doesn't it, really? Because, of course, Felipe Massa was one of the guys affected by that. Both him and his Venturi teammate, Eduardo Mortara, out, both with drive shaft failures. And Van Dorn even stopped on the cooldown lap with a drive shaft issue. And HWA, of course, a Venturi customer. So, three drive shaft failures on 3 cars. Luckily, one was a bit after the checkered flag. Now, I said earlier, this is a tough race for drive shafts, but nonetheless, it's an issue with the supplier. They can make an. I think they have actually made a quote unquote upgrade, which you're kind of allowed to do. It's the kind of standard FIA reg where you can change a homologated part for reliability, safety, non-performance related reasons, effectively. Which is, I think, what's happened certainly down at HWA. Whether Venturi have just kind of tested it out on them or they've done it for themselves, I'm not quite sure yet. But nonetheless, well, doesn't seem to have worked, does it? Either way, it may hold out better in other races, but certainly here, no, it hasn't. So there's an issue there. We know ZF took control of the powertrain design. We're having just done the gearbox last season, so now they're in charge of the motor and inverter as well. So it would seem like there is an issue around that area with them.
Right. Okay. So one more thing. I was looking at the race result, and I couldn't help but notice that once again, Lucas di Grassi had managed to work his way up the field into a relatively decent position. And then when I look at the championship standings, I notice that once again, Lucas di Grassi has managed to work his way up into a fairly decent place. And are we seeing the kind of consistency that might wind up winning him the championship, or are we still they're just rolling the dice every race? Because I don't see them having quite the pace to win, but he seems to be there or thereabouts more often. Or am I just misremembering the last couple of races?
Oh, I wouldn't say Audi are the fastest. They are among the fastest. But you got like 6 guys you can say are the fastest, and Audi are in that. So yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, overall for the title contenders, it was a really low scoring race. Di Grassi only P7, D'Ambrosio, Costa 8th and 9th. Bird didn't score any points for the second race in a row. So there's that, there's consistency, but you've got to be consistent in a decent enough position, so there's Jev making sure he always finished in the top 5 of every race last season for the vast majority of the season. I think all bar 2 races, right? Which is what put him in that position. There's no good always coming 7th. I mean, Mitch has already proved that he wasn't in amongst the championship fight with that while he was scoring consistent 6th and 7th places. So you've got to be high enough to benefit from that. Chat room is also agreeing that Evans is really consistent. It's only now that he's won a race that he's actually amongst these guys, right? So you do have to be consistent. It is funny. Whenever it's so difficult to call this championship, but every single day something kind of niggles me. Like, I think Lucas is in a good position, right? Because there's something about the way Lucas races and he goes about his motorsport that seems to be a way that he's going to be the one that comes away with this in the end. Now that's not a prediction, that's just a kind of gut feeling. Like I said, we got 9 guys realistically in contention for this title still, and we're at the halfway point of the season now. So, it's by no means a prediction. I mean, they could well be at the bottom of that. They could be 9th for all we know by the end of the season. But, yeah, we'll see. I just get a feeling, but I get a feeling about a lot of these guys every now and then. But we know Lucas is consistent. It's how he won his championship.
Forest and not trees. All right, well, what say we head on to any other business? And I still don't know why that one is so loud, but there you go.
Yeah, I mean, I'll wrap up on the F1 alumni because we haven't talked about Stoffel Van Dorn, really. P3, what an amazing race it was for them at last. Finally, they're getting the result that they actually, deserve. And Lord knows, this is, as much as it's been a long time coming for Jaguar, this has been a really welcome result for the fans. I think, everyone loves Stoffel, really. I don't know how you can't like the guy. And for HWA as a new team, they've been learning really, really hard. Yet the qualifying paid into it as well. But Van Dorn's been great in qualifying this season. But for them to see the race pace at last, we saw Santiago, they were dropping back. Here, they didn't. They held that position the entire race. That is crucial. They're getting on top of things at HWA. Really, really strong result. And there isn't even much more to say about it. That was just pace.
Yeah, well, that was a race that matched his personality so exquisitely because it was just yep, there we go.
Yeah, it was like him going off into the distance when he won his GP2 championship. I will quickly wrap up on the F1 alumni. Pascal Wehrlein, P10 after the penalty. Mahindra not quite there on the pace, it would seem, but he was quite happy with it given the circumstances. So, any other business? So the chat room was asking who came fourth. It was Robin Fraintz. Sebastian Buemi just got passed by him right in the closing stages of the races. Ollie Rowland, P10 to P6 on the opening lap. Great few corners there for him, but then didn't really go anywhere. And that's because Nissan miscalculated the length of the race. They thought the race was going to be 1 lap longer than it actually was. So they were conserving all this energy, thinking it was going to be a lap longer. And then about 3 laps to the end, they're like, we're not actually going to do this extra lap. Whereas if they'd used that energy better, a little bit more each lap, on average, they'd have been much, much quicker. So we don't really know where they might have ended up in amongst, with Fraintz, with Van Dorn, with the leaders even maybe. But yeah, a bit of a costly error, but at least better than miscalculating it the other way like they did in Mexico. Alex Lynn, worth talking about him. He got excluded from qualifying because he got clocked over the 250 kilowatt limit in qualifying. Really, really unfortunate for him because it was only for, a split second. So he didn't really gain anything from it. And to qualify P9 as well, great stuff from him. Only had a 50-kilometer filming day of experience under his belt in a Gen 2 car before he got in. So that was it. 50 kilometers filming, shakedown. That's all he had. And he recovered really, really well to 12th place in the end. So had he started 9th, for sure, he would have been on for some really good points, I think. And I'm really glad Alex is back in the championship, to be honest, because we sort of alluded to it in our last show, Matt, that maybe at DS Virgin he didn't get the opportunity he needed to shine because that's fair. You don't become an Aston Martin factory driver by not being much good. So hopefully we're going to see the potential with Jaguar now that they know how to unlock the potential of the car. They can do that at every race. Alex is potential race winner.
Excellent. We have a couple of questions in the chat room. Stuart Neal has asked for the backstory on the PK Jr. departure. Now, I know we've discussed this on a previous show, so I don't want to get too deep into the weeds. But have we heard anything else? Is this still officially just an amicable split between two parties headed in different directions? Or did you pick up anything else in the paddock this weekend where you were in Rome in the paddock being an awesome reporter?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, officially, yeah, it's all still the same. I mean, Nelson seems, from what I hear, quite content with how things are going. He's going off and doing Brazilian stock cars, which he very much enjoys. So I think for him, it's more just about getting to enjoy his motorsport again, which he obviously wasn't doing informally. The last few races, he didn't want to be there. So maybe for him, it's just about getting on with his motorsport. And I'm sure Jaguar are very happy to have somebody on pace, really on pace in that car.
Uh-oh.
Are we back?
Yep, indeed we are. Eric Hine would like to know if you think Maxi Gunter might be better than Felipe Nasr. And this is going to be a tough one because Nasr doesn't have a lot of experience. But from what you've seen, from what you've picked up, do you have an opinion on that yet?
Neither of them got experience, really, do they? And that is a tough one. I was really impressed by both of them. I have to say, Max Evans had quite a difficult start, to the championship those first two races, but in Santiago he was really really strong. NASA kind of came in and kind of kicked butt right away, out qualifying Lopez on his debut, and would have run a really strong race had he not had guys clattering into the side of him. So there's a lot of caveats in there, to be honest. I do think Maxi got a little bit mistreated, because I struggle to believe he would have given up, the last F2 race, and only done, sign up only to do 3 races, knowing he'd be replaced by Felipe Nasr midway through the season, because that's just not something I think a driver in his position does. So there's that. I feel for Maxi for sure, because I still think he should be in the car, but also Felipe Nasr is very good. So maybe we'll circle back to this one at the beginning of at the end of the season.
All right. And I think we have one more from our friend Esteban Garcia. He would like to know if you've heard anything about a potential second race in South America in season 6. And I'm sure that's not any kind of self-interest at all from him.
No, as the Argentinian. Yeah, as much as I'd love the return to Buenos Aires, Brazil is still back, still on the cards. So Sao Paulo, that is on the cards. But I think beyond that, there isn't really much going on. They're really trying to crack the more of the Asian market, I think, and add a few more European rounds. So Vienna is one of them, and obviously bringing London back as well. And then Sale should be having a race in season 6 as well. So quite a few new additions coming for the season. I will just quickly wrap up on the any other business, because I wanted to talk about Neo, who I think we can now officially call them the slowest team on the grid.
Okay, fine with me.
Which is I hate saying stuff like that, because it's a hardworking team, and it's just the hardware's not coming together, I think, and still having issues with the braking performance, it would seem. And God knows those drivers deserve a better car than what they've got this year, because they're both capable of winning races. Stick them in an Audi and they'll do just fine. So let's hope that things do pick up for them. And Dragon really did not take advantage of their quali pace, did they? Maxi Gunter didn't even really make it to the finish. He ran out of energy. Was kind of running not so great, lower end of the points, but not amazing pace, which, to be honest, I wasn't expecting them to maintain that kind of quali speed during the race. And Lopez, as mentioned, never really got back up the grid after his erratic first lap and drive-through penalty.
Well done. What say we head for a podium? I never get tired of that tune. So tell us, Chris Stevens, who or what was your thing of the weekend?
Thing of the weekend is a really tough one, I think.
It is.
I am going to give it to Stoffel. I'm going to give it to Stoffel because he, he's always been impressive in Formula E, I think. And at times the car's not letting him show that potential. The car held up this time, and we finally got to see Stoffel up on the podium, and he fully deserves it.
Yeah, no, and yeah, this is a tough one because I kind of want to say, well, fine, I'll give it to Mitch because he deserves it. But I think I might have to just give it to the battle for first place, and in particular, his overtake on Lauderer, because, oh my, it was just, as you said, it was a thing of beauty to watch. It was one of the best on-track battles I've seen in some time, and especially because it went on for more than, let's say, 3 corners.
Yeah, Exactly. It was a proper, yeah, what you said it earlier, duel. And duel is exactly right. There was a to and a fro there. There was times where one guy looked like he had an advantage and one guy
Ah,
didn't, and vice versa. Proper good scrap.
indeed. All right, and that brings us to everybody's other favorite award: who or what missed the apex? And I can only guess who you might be saying right now.
There are a few.
Yeah.
They,
Okay.
for me, it's Dragon, unfortunately, just not unlocking the potential. They had such a great qualifying, and yeah, the drivers really let themselves down on that one. I fear it's a shame. It really is. I don't like saying it, but that was not good from either of them.
Yeah. And as tempted as I would be to say Lopez, because he quite literally missed an apex
Yeah.
by hitting a wall instead, I will shelve that under Dragon. And I don't know. I'm tempted because there's the whole drive shaft issue at Venturi to knock them on. But I'm going to pick the race director because I don't understand why you would publicly broadcast a warning like that to your two leading drivers after such a basically clean race. Neither of them was on the radio complaining about the other one. I don't get it. I think it makes him look silly. I think it makes the series look silly to do stuff like that. You got to penalize them, then penalize them. Otherwise, you should just wait till after the race and put it in your notes for the next drivers meeting for the next race.
And Andre even said after the race that he had no issue with it. It was just, and I quote, good racing.
Yeah, it was the best racing this weekend. I will say it. I watched a fair amount of it. And guess what we have this week?
Comment of the week.
That's right. It's getting hot in the chat room, and we have two contenders for comment of the week. Who are they, Chris?
So we got a couple. You've picked out a couple here. There was Eric Hine. Lopez got overexcited about his great qualifying. There were two little cars in front of him, so he got confused and overshot the first corner. And as much as that is funny, that could actually be a nice.
I know. It made me laugh.
We also have Stuart Neal. At least Van Dorn is used to cars breaking down. It's kind of sad, really, isn't it?
Bad trombone. Wah, wah, wah.
I think we're going to give it to Eric on this occasion.
All right, congratulations, Eric Hine. You are this week's winner of
Comment of the week.
And that brings us to the time for plugging. Where are you? Where can we find you? What are you up to, Chris Stevens?
So on Twitter, I'm at Chris on Racing. So you can go on there for all of my Formula E stuff, my travels and excitements, and all stuff of past glories. And I'll be getting my website done at some point, I imagine. I know I said that last week and haven't gotten any closer to getting it even started, let alone finished. But do check me out on Twitter while you're there. And also, don't forget, this weekend, it's race week for us at Missed Apex Podcast, because this is the week we go karting at Rye House on Saturday. And we do a live show as well. Tune in because it's going to be an awful lot of fun.
It is. I did the one at Buckmore. And if you can possibly make it, you should absolutely go. As for me, I'm at MattPT55 on the Twitters. Come tell me how I'm wrong about everything, because quite frankly, everybody else does. My wife, at A Weaver Writes on Twitter, has a new book up for pre-order. It's called Love and the Laws of Motion. It is about, well, an astronomer, amongst other things, in Brooklyn, which, hey, pretty local to us. And finally, don't forget, you can catch us on Twitter at eRadio Show. And if you are part of our you can catch us on Twitter at eRadio Show. And if you are a part of our Missed Apex Slack group, be sure to join Formula E as well. And remember, chicks dig heels, wounds cause scars, and glory is a fungible concept under certain philosophical precepts. This has been eRadio Show.